There's 3 criteria for being on my version of the list, and that is good company on the trail. People that they're interesting and they're interested. They don't have to be the center of attention. They want to know, they're curious about things. And then people that are, you'll like this one, reasonably fit. Just because the trips I do, you can do more if the group is reasonably fit. And they've got their gear dialed in. That helps on the trips too. They know what they're doing. It's not their first time backpacking, typically. So my shorthand for the first one, at least, is, people that have something to say, but nothing to prove.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus. Thanks for listening to the Hike Strong podcast. I am a hiking strength and conditioning coach and founder of fitfortrips.com. I am so grateful to talk to this man today. His trail name was Homemade because so much of the gear he used was made by himself, which should tell you a lot about him already. But his buddy John Mackey, co-founder and former CEO of Whole Foods, dubbed him Legend because he is a legend to his friends and fellow ultralight hikers. But I have another name for him, and that is Sage. A sage is a person famed for his wisdom. So why the trail name Sage? Well, I recently read his book titled Take Less, Do More. And in this book, he details instructions for ultralight backpacking, but more importantly, he provides 15 lessons learned from his life as an ultralight backpacking pioneer that you can apply to your life today. He is a husband, a father of 3 children, an engineer by trade, the founder of Gossamer Gear, which provides functional ultralight backpacking and hiking gear. But perhaps the most important thing you should know about Glen is that he is a fantastic dishwasher. Glen Van Peski, welcome to the Hike Strong podcast.
Thanks, Marcus. I appreciate the introduction. And I have to qualify that. I think I'm a good dishwasher in terms of quality, but I know the young kids really can run circles around me in terms of speed. But
okay, but you've got wisdom.
When I wash it, it's clean. Some of theirs need to go back again.
All right, well, that goes back to your wisdom, okay? Haste makes waste, or whatever adage you want to apply to that. But yeah, you've learned it's better good quality clean than to get more done in the kitchen. So anyway, folks, if you're wondering what we're talking about as far as a dishwasher, you're just going to have to read the book. Anyway, I do, of course, want to talk about ultralight backpacking, but first, let's discuss your book. So I'm struck in the book by how many quality relationships that you have in your life. There are so many strategies that you've used to meet people and nurture relationships that are weaved into this book in so many of the lessons. I just wanted to mention that so readers have just a little window into what they'll get from applying the lessons in the book. But how about just name like 1 or 2 other major takeaways that you want readers to learn or be able to apply after, reading the book?
Besides the importance of relationships and some tactics, I guess, for doing that, because I'm an introvert, so I have to work at it. Some people don't, like my wife, for instance. Other takeaways would be the importance of getting intentional about your generosity. I think most people want to be generous, but it's kind of haphazard. And so I describe in the book a way of getting intentional about that and creating a separate fund that you divert automatically a set percentage to, so that you have funds to be generous as opportunities arise. I would say handwritten notes, which is kind of part of the, relationships, but it's such a forgotten art in this day and age of actually putting pen to paper. People feel pretty good if they write a thank you email, but just the light of opening something that someone actually took time to do, put a stamp on, put in a mailbox, can't be understated or overstated, I guess.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly about writing notes for sure. It's one thing our kids have fought us year after year about writing thank you notes for gifts they've received or maybe vacations they've been invited on. But now actually they're pretty skilled at that. I think that's something I'm certainly proud of. I didn't think you'd mention that in the book, but yeah, that's great.
That's a big one to pass on to your kids. I know we were thrash our kids until they got it done and make lists and make them check it off. And they, it's like any skill, you build it. I mean, some of their early attempts were pretty rudimentary and crude, but, as they get older, it was a nice conversation, expressing gratitude and the good times that they had and how important that was to them. So it's good to see that we're passing that skill on to the next generation.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about the book, but let's do something fun before we really get started and discuss how you met some of the famous people mentioned in the book. So let's first talk about how you met John Mackey, founder and former CEO of Whole Foods.
Well, sure. It's a long thread with a lot of points that, when I think about it, could be broken at any one point and things would have turned out differently. So it goes back to actually me making my own gear and founding Gossamer Gear and getting, Boy Scouts, getting involved in ultralight backpacking, and also involves giving back, getting involved in the Pacific Crest Trail Association organization on the board. And we were looking for board meeting, talking about getting additional board members. And Henry Shires of Tarp Tent says, well, what about John Mackey? And I said, who's John Mackey? Not being someone who shops at Whole Foods Market, which was always a bone of contention whenever I got together with John. But so Henry explains, well, he's co-founder of Whole Foods Market and he's a big hiker. He orders a lot of gear from me. And so I checked my yellow line pad of paper with gear orders on it when I got back home. And sure enough, John Mackey had ordered a bunch of gear from me. I just didn't recognize him. And so we decided to pitch John Mackey on board membership. And because at this point I had a little bit of a reputation for a guy with a light pack, and John, besides being a very strong hiker and obviously a smart businessman, is quite the gear guy. He loves gear. So he was interested in meeting me. So I was kind of the bait for sitting down to talk about joining the board of the PCTA. And I had a speaking engagement for the Continental Divide Trail Alliance about that time. He was in Boulder for the summer. And so we set up a meeting, and that's how I met John Mackey.
Okay. All right. And the next guy, Dan Buettner, I don't know that the listeners, all of them will know who he is. Maybe some of them, especially those who listen to the Hike Strong podcast. There's probably maybe some crossover there. So he's the founder of BlueZones.com. Blue Zone is used to describe the regions of the world where people live longer and healthier lives than average. How'd you meet that guy?
He's a friend of John's. I mean, that's been so many of the amazing friends I have are through that one meeting with John, because he travels in a circle of amazing people. He likes to hike still a lot, and he likes to invite interesting people on those hikes. And so anytime I get invited on one of those hikes, I try and make it, because it's, the people are going to be interesting. And so you meet lots of interesting people and get to know them. And, when you're walking all day, you have lots of time to get to know them and talk about things that matter. So Dan Buettner is someone that I met through John Mackey, as with, many of my interesting friends.
Yeah. And so that's a good segue to the next guy, which if you don't know who he is, you're living under a rock or something. And I think you met him through Dan. So tell us how you met Matthew McConaughey. And again, folks, if you don't know, he is an actor, New York Times best-selling author of Green Light. So anyway.
Yeah, he's a friend of Dan's. And Dan himself has amazing, he is such a storyteller. He's met the Queen of England and, just amazing stories come out of Dan when you get him alone for a couple hours. But yeah, Matthew McConaughey is a friend of his, and you'd have to talk to Dan as to, how they met. Who knows? He has friends like Lance Armstrong, and he has a lot of friends, a lot of famous friends. And so I do a hike down Buckskin Gulch every year and invited Dan to go. And Dan asked if he could bring along a friend. And I said, yeah, okay. And then, I get a call a week later, well, can I bring along another friend? And then a week later, I get another friend that wants to go. And so finally, I just said, Dan, why don't we make this your trip? It'll be, all your friends instead of going out to my list. And so, yeah, he put together a list. And actually, now I'm friends with David McLean, a National Geographic photographer who does all of Dan Buettner's work on his books. And we're doing a hike with a bunch of his friends in Emigrant Wilderness next week. So, that's how it is with relationships. You click with someone and then you meet their friends and you click with a couple of them and you make new friends.
Well, and you managed to nurture those, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm curious, at the time that you were hiking with Matthew McConaughey, had he yet written his book, Green Lights? Do you remember? And the reason why I ask is because, and actually, my wife, she wanted to know this question. And she was curious if he had published that book at the time. Did you know you were going to write your book? And if so, did you by chance ask him any advice about, writing a book? I know that's a shot in the dark, but figuring I'd ask.
I did not. His book, I don't know when it came out, but it was after mine. So I didn't know. I mean, he was probably working on it at the time. I don't know, but it didn't come up. So I didn't know. So, and he's a friend of a friend. So he's likely not someone I would have asked for advice on writing a book because, he's famous. And I don't know, his advice might not be directly applicable. And besides, when I thought about it, I have tons of friends who have written books and, they were very generous with their time and effort and advice and helped me along the process.
All right. So that was fun. Thanks for sharing. So let's segue into a discussion about the LIST project. So tell the listeners about it and hopefully they can formulate a way that maybe, they can replicate it.
Sure. I maintain something I call the LIST, and it's actually something I kind of stole from John Mackey. He invites people on these hikes and he has kind of different groups of friends because, if it's a backpacking trip, he has friends that aren't so much backpackers, although he does love to introduce people to backpacking that aren't familiar with it. And he has a lot of loaner gear, so he can make that happen. But as best I can determine, my criteria based on observing his trips, there's 3 criteria for being on my version of the list. And that is good company on the trail. People that they're interesting and they're interested. They don't have to be the center of attention. They want to know, they're curious about things. And then people that are, you'll like this one, reasonably fit, just because the trips I do, you can do more if the group is reasonably fit. And they've got their gear dialed in. That helps on the trips too. They know what they're doing. It's not their first time backpacking, typically. So my shorthand for the first one, at least, is, people that have something to say, but nothing to prove. And so I've got a list of currently probably about 65 people. And so I'll get permits for a trip and then send out a blind copy to the list. And whoever can make it responds. They usually fill in 24 to 48 hours, and I'll start a waiting list in case somebody can't make it. And so we do a 3 or 4 day trip in a beautiful area. And typically I'm the only connection, the only one that everyone knows. And so, they meet other interesting, fun people and often develop relationships from those trips that go on. They go on and plan their own trips. And so, I think the list is just a great way. I've got the permits. It's usually a trip I've done before, so I can answer questions. I'm not a guide. I'm not there to babysit them, but I can answer questions and help with, how to get there, what to expect. But it's a great opportunity. It makes it easy for them. They just kind of have to pack and show up and, they have a good time and meet interesting people, see some beautiful parts of the world.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was the only destination for the list. Do you go to other places or because it's comfortable and that's the least of your worries when this large group goes?
It's not the only one, but it's a constant one. It's one I do every year in April. And so I do other ones, usually, the canyon is Buckskin Gulch is an exception. My favorite place is kind of above tree line in the mountains. So that's a more typical trip, either in the local Cascades or Immigrant Wilderness. It's easy for people to get to. Sometimes Golden Trial Wilderness, John Muir Wilderness in there.
Okay. So because you see value in sleeping on the ground, filtering water, cooking over a stove or a fuel tab is important. I'm assuming that the people that go on your trips, do they experience that? And if so, talk about how they respond to it and just talk about why, those things are valuable.
Typically, there are exceptions, but typically the people that go on my trips are fairly experienced backpackers. And so, they also enjoy sleeping on the ground and cooking over a small stove and eating dehydrated food and putting in long miles. Otherwise, they wouldn't go on the trip with me. I think some of the value of that is just getting away from the daily crush of emails and things we have to do and to-do list. Michael Easter in his book, The Comfort Crisis, talks about, how we've done such a good job of killing boredom. It's killing us, killing our attention span. And there's just something magical about getting 3 days out on a trip. You have no cell coverage. You can't do anything on any of your to-do lists. And so you have time to just let your mind wander, have conversations with the people with you and think about, anything or think about nothing and just clear your mind. And there's magic in that. That's something we all need.
Yeah. And I think folks should read Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis. He does talk about what you're referring to as the 3-day effect. And I can attest to that as well. Maybe you can give your version of it. I'm curious what you've experienced at that day, that third day, even fourth or fifth day, when just you're not thinking about anything but just being in the moment, just food you're going to prepare or whatever. Anyway, just talk about your experience with that.
Yeah, it depends. I am probably unusually happy without outside stimulation. Drives my wife crazy when we're on a road trip because I can just sit there in silence driving for many, many hours, much longer than she's happy with. And, I can be thinking about things around me, things I'm observing, wondering about the geology, what formed that, thinking about, okay, if I had to camp here, where would I pitch my tarp? I could be thinking about gear oftentimes for me, what's working well, what could work better, how I could tweak things. I could be thinking about people that I haven't thought about in a while. And hey, I wonder about Joe. I wonder how he's doing. I need to get in touch with him, remake that connection. I can be thinking about, changes that I need to make in my life. It's too easy to avoid on the day-to-day when you've got a to-do list to check off. And when you don't, sometimes you have to face things that otherwise it's convenient to put off. I know John Mackey used to take hikes even when he was running Whole Foods, he'd be off for 3 months hiking. And obviously he'd check in with breaks for board meetings or analyst reports. But he told me once that his senior leadership team was always a little nervous when he came back from a long hike because of the clarity they would have received on thinking about things. The one I remember him mentioning was he got back from one hike and told his management team, we're a health food company. We can't have staff that smokes and eats bad food and has bad habits. We need to set an example. And maybe, I don't know if it was all staff or, senior staff or whatever, but he says, yeah, they're always a little nervous when I come back from a long hike. It's like, okay, what realizations has he had that are going to make us scramble here for a while?
Yeah, I get it. I can relate to that. And so people listening, take that advice. If you need to hire a backpacking guide or something, do it. Just to find a trusting guide. In fact, listen to some of the other Hike Strong podcasts where I do interview guides. Hire them and get out there in the wilderness. Glen's not joking. You'll come back with some kind of epiphany of some kind in your life. So definitely do it. But that's interesting you bring up the 3-day effect, because I asked you when we first chatted about what kind of trends are you seeing in the hiking industry, and you didn't really like the fact that there were a lot of these extreme one-day events in hiking. And now I can understand why, because you miss out on the 3-day effect and those benefits related to that.
There are other benefits. People are getting outside, they're challenging themselves, they're meeting other people. So there's nothing wrong with those. I've run plenty of ultra marathons and things like that, but you don't get the effect. You don't get the 3-day effect. Which right. I think we need.
So it's just different. I agree with you. It's just different. In a couple of weeks, I'll be doing rim to rim again. So we're going to do it in one day. But yeah, we won't get that 3-day effect. But in Michael Easter's book, he does talk about just getting out in nature, just even doing just forest bathing, which you can go out.
And also he talks about the importance of challenging yourself, like once a year doing something that you might not be able to complete. It's a hard effort because that pushes you, and there are other benefits from that. But they're all separate benefits. It's not that one is bad. It's just you don't get the 3-day effect from that.
That's correct. Yeah. So there's a lot of discounting of gear these days online. People are trying to move their inventory. And you were explaining to me that a lot of companies kind of over projected their growth coming out of COVID. You mentioned there was kind of an overreaction to the popularity of hiking and backpacking, and companies purchased a large supply of product. You said Gossamer Gear didn't really fall into that trap. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Any comment on that? I don't know.
We just saw the COVID bounce that people suddenly outside people kind of rediscovered the outside because it was a safe place and there was lots of fresh air. And, they weren't tied to going to an office anymore. So it was easier to get outside. And so a lot of outdoor companies saw sales go up 40, 50%. And I don't know what the thinking was, if they thought now that people have discovered the outside, it's off to the races and this is going to go on forever. And so I think they, ordered a bunch of stuff. And then, of course, supply chain issues meant some of that didn't come. So they ordered more. And, then when it all arrived, they had too much. And, I haven't seen, I'm sure there are studies, I haven't seen them as to, how much of that outside effect residual we have from COVID. I mean, I think it certainly seems like once restrictions lifted, people went back to restaurants and discos and clubs, wherever else people go. But I suspect that there's still some residual, even though people are maybe going to concerts now, they're probably still thinking about, gosh, that hiking, that was really good. I enjoyed that. So I'm guessing there's some residual effect of that.
Yeah. So you founded Gossamer Gear in 2003, which drove the ultralight movement in the early days. You never got patents. You just really got into it to kind of help people, and it fostered a rippling effect in the industry. So just curious how you feel about that. You can comment on, anything there.
Yeah, I actually started in 1998. It was GVP gear in the early days because, I thought I was only going to sell 25 packs. So I didn't put too much effort into a name. And I was wrong. We've sold a lot of packs. And, the goal originally, I couldn't get light stuff. I mean, if it was going through that journey today, that I don't know if I'd sell my own because there's so many alternatives out there. Although I probably would because I still sell my own gear that I can't find them. If some that I want, exactly like our latest tent, the Whisper, that I wanted something for a bike packing trip, 1,000 miles, and I wanted something lighter than was available. So I, made one. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I never, put the plans of the first pack, the G4, out on the internet for free that people could make their own because I just didn't figure it would ever amount to anything. And, I never took a salary because I never quit my day job. So, but it's gratifying to see. Really, it's about the people that we've helped enjoy the outdoors, people who, thought they'd have to give up backpacking as they got older, but now with lighter loads, they can still continue to enjoy that 3-day effect out in the outdoors. So, and people starting out, they can go out with less weight than they thought, and so they can enjoy it more than they thought they would.
Well, I was going to ask you to make your pitch why new backpackers should go ultralight, but I think you've just kind of done that. But maybe you can flesh out a little bit more so you can answer that question. But I also want you to kind of define it. I don't know, for people who don't, it's pretty obvious in the name, but, and then define base weight. I think that's one of the key things that people need to understand.
It's common in talking about pack weight to use the term base weight. And base weight is all your gear except food and water and what you're wearing, typically wearing all the time during the day. And the reason for that is, food and water is going to vary on the trip. If you're hiking in the desert, you're going to be carrying more water. If it's a longer trip, you'll be carrying more food. So taking that off of the equation, your base weight is, your sleeping bag, your shelter, your pack, your sleeping pad, extra clothes, your warm clothes, things like that, your first aid, hydration, all that kind of stuff. And there are people have gone through and picked weights for different categories between, lightweight, ultralight, extreme ultralight, super ultralight. And I don't remember what those are. I think generally most people consider if your base weight is under 10 pounds, that's lightweight. And, the benefit to beginning backpackers are in today's environment, just through the careful selection of gear, you can get stuff that behaves the way you expect and doesn't require a lot of additional skills. And just through skillful use of materials and construction is going to be a lot lighter. And, you'll be more comfortable out there with a lighter pack. To get to, extreme ultralight, you typically need to pick up some extra skills, how to sleep warm in a lighter bag and how to set up a tarp instead of a tent. But even for beginning backpackers without those skills, you can get a lot of benefit just picking the right lightweight gear.
Yeah. And I was curious about the innovation currently in the ultralight industry, whether it would be, is it weight, durability, or features, but you actually provided an interesting point. And that was that you just do the work of not overpacking. And that does a lot of work in solving the problems regarding the extra padding and the frames that you need to add to the pack, which just then again adds more weight to it.
Yeah. I mean, something you leave behind either because you've figured out you don't need it, or you figured out something else can do 2 or 3 things, so you don't need that special purpose item that only does one. Anything you leave out of your pack is just bonus. It's free weight.
Let's see how far we want to go down this rabbit hole, because I do have other things that I want to ask you about. But let's maybe do 2 steps here. So 3 to 5 things to do in the process of lightening someone's load, and then maybe 5 more advanced things somebody can do.
Okay. I usually recommend that people first list out all the gear on a spreadsheet and weigh it. At this point, most people are surprised at two things. One, how many individual items they actually take on a trip. And three, how a lot of things that don't seem to weigh very much when they hold them in their hand, when you add them all up, the total is pretty significant. And then people can look for multiple use items. Things like, sometimes it's specialty items. Maybe it's a titanium cup. So then you can also cook in it. It can be as simple as thinking about it. A bandana can also serve as keep the sun off your neck. It can serve as a washcloth, serve as a towel. It can help pre-filter your water from a bad water source. So it's just thinking about everything and like, okay, is there another way I can accomplish this with a different item? And then of the items you take, not taking more than you need. From my days in Boy Scouts, we'd see scouts heading out there with an 8-ounce bottle of sunscreen because that's what their mom gave them because that's all they had. Well, that's probably fine. But, if you're trying to trim your weight, you want to repackage things or get trial sizes, either from your dermatologist or dentist, or, figure out how to only take what you need, basically. And then of the items you take, after you've looked for multiple use items, try and find the lightest ones you can, go with titanium or bamboo or lighter fabrics to make sure that the stuff you are taking, a down sleeping bag instead of synthetic, to make sure it's the lightest thing you can take. And then, this may be veering into the bonus things. One area is a lot of people take too much food. That food tends to be on the heavy side. If you come back with food, then you've carried that the whole way for nothing, basically, just like a brick in your bag. So I actually was just laying food out for my immigrant trip today. It's going to be 3 days times 1.4 pounds is 4.2 pounds. And I laid out 4.2 pounds of food. And because I know that's how much I'll eat. Now, if you take more than that, I know I'll just bring it back. And I know if I take less than that, I'll probably be hungry. So, it's that number will be different for everyone. But if they start weighing their food before and after, pretty soon they'll hone in on what their food weight is.
Well, do you think there'll be a day when backpacking is ultralight and the terms kind of become synonymous with backpacking? Or I guess another way to frame the question is, will there always be an ultralight category? Will today's ultralight standards be non-ultralight 5 years from now? And in 5 years, things will be even lighter. I mean, how far can this go? It's just fun to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. So my general base weight is under 5 pounds. It's just interesting to think if now probably most people would consider that extreme ultralight or super ultralight, whatever they call it. But it's interesting to think like, okay, in 10 years, is that going to be, that's like regular lightweight. And I think we might be hitting the point of diminishing returns. It depends on, I think there'll always be a variation because it's a variation on trips. Some people want to do some peak bagging and maybe they need some rope. So, okay, well, right away, their pack's going to be heavier. They're not going to be doing as many miles. They have special things they want to do. Sometimes people will bring in fancy camera equipment. They may have a couple pounds of camera equipment because that's their passion and that's what they want to do. And so, going lighter on the rest of the gear allows them an easier time carrying the camera gear that's important to them. And then there's some people that just like to go out, find a lake and, sit around the lake for a couple of days. And so they're going to be carrying camp chairs and camp shoes and extra swimsuits and who knows what, because that's how they like to enjoy the outdoors. So I think there'll always be a variation on the weights for backpacking.
All right, that makes sense. I had asked you about kind of conventional wisdom in backpacking that you disagree with. And you said that is just allowing your shoes to get wet. So I want you to expand on that. I think that was kind of interesting. See how many people can be influenced by this.
Yeah, this may be different. The saying in the long distance hiking, your mileage may vary. This is my personal experience. Yours may be different. But I found that the typical conventional wisdom is, you want to keep your feet dry because if your feet get wet, they expand and you'll get blisters, which are bad. And, that's probably true. But I have found that for me, it doesn't, if I have fast draining shoes, I can loosen up my shoes. I have a brand of shoes, Ultra, that have wider toe box. So that may be part of it. And it could be the shape of my feet. But I found I can hike for, in a typical situation, you're going through a stream or a wet area or something. If you just hike on for an hour, your feet are dry again. In extreme cases, I have hiked in early season where we're hiking through snow all day and my feet have been wet all day. Now, in that case, you don't have a heat issue, so that could be a mitigating circumstance. But I found surprisingly few ill effects from hiking in water, more than conventional wisdom would indicate.
Okay. All right, let's segue into fitness. I don't think we'll spend a whole lot of time here, but we'll talk about that. So in every episode, I'm always going to mention the Fit for Trips Big Five, and I'm not going to go into detail, but maybe I'll spark something in your brain and you'll want to comment on it. So there are 5 pillars that people should weave into their hiking training plans. I call the Fit for Trips Big Five. And really, I created it because most people can't hike to get in shape for hiking. And I know that you can, and we're going to talk about that. And so there are 5 things to weave in. 1 is walk inclines, 2 walk stairs, 3 walk lunges, 4 walk far, and 5 HIIT training or high intensity interval training. Now, I know that you don't work out, and we can talk about that. I think that's interesting. You're able to frequently hike to stay in shape. We talked about this. You don't have excess body weight and you pay attention to your diet. So let me ask you this. If you were putting together like a challenging trip for you and your buddies, how far out would you need to start hiking to get into trip shape? Assuming you're not going to do kind of a conventional workout or anything in the gym, which some people have to do. You have a lot of muscle memory and done so much hiking, so I know that helps, but how far out do you think you need to kind of start hiking again to be ready and feel confident on a challenging trip?
Well, I'm leaving a week from yesterday. I couldn't tell you. I'd have to look at couldn't tell you last time I actually walked or did anything. And I probably won't have time to do any of that before that trip. But that's going to be, modest mileage, 10 or 12 miles a day. So I'm not too worried about it. Bike packing trip I found was different for me because of different muscles. And part of it is getting your butt in shape or calloused or however that works. And so I'd probably, for that, probably a month out.
Okay.
Yeah. For hiking, I don't know.
Well, you just talked to that. I mean, you've done so much hiking. Do you think that if you lived in an urban setting and couldn't hike to get in shape for hiking, I'm assuming that, that's changing your life completely. That's a weird hypothetical because that hasn't been your life as of late.
I don't hike to get into shape for hiking now. I mean,
because
basically going from the couch to hiking, which, I'm only 66. I know that's going to change. I do eat a healthy diet and watch my weight. And I do live in a 3-story house. So I'm always going up and down the stairs all day. That probably helps. But I know I'm going to have to start doing something. And so, I would definitely, walking some miles, probably, I don't worry about walking with weight because I'm not carrying that much weight. But for most people, that would probably make sense and strengthen your core. And then definitely, so I am headed in January to the Himalayas. I am going to do some training for that. And we have a local butte here that has some pretty good inclines. So I'm figuring I'm going to have to get after that pretty soon, actually start doing some trips up that to actually get some elevation. And that's January, so we'll be back in town for December. So hopefully like a couple months of kind of being active on an intentional basis for that. That's my plan.
Okay. So Fit for Trips Big Five. You got it, Glenn?
Got it.
Okay. In that, so your friend John Mackey says, I can't remember if this was in your book. No, I think it's just something we talked about. Says the third day of any backpacking trip is the hardest. And then it actually gets easier from there and you get stronger after that. Now, just by nature, I mitigate any of those issues by training myself and my clients, of course, before any kind of trip. But again, going back to just getting out and hiking, I just think there is some muscle memory. People do it frequently, are really confident on the trail, really confident with the gear they have. They just know it so well. I think that's probably part of it. Maybe John is the same thing, but let's just for a moment pretend he doesn't train for his trips, perhaps like you. I find that interesting, and maybe you can corroborate that after a few days, you're just kind of gets easier after that, and then you're kind of grooving.
Part of it's physical, but when you're doing a longer hike, if you're out for a couple of weeks or more, I think part of it's mental. You just, getting into, it's one thing to go out and hike hard for one day and then go back and sleep in a nice soft bed. But, sleeping on the ground and then getting up early, eating different foods than you probably eat at home, and doing that day after day after day does takes a toll on the body, I think, especially if you're doing 20, 30-mile days, day after day after day. But also there's a mental, just getting into the rhythm of life on the trail that comes into that. Now, John, I will say, is very fit. He keeps himself fit, unless he's out on a book tour or something like that. He walks 3 to 5 miles a day, plays pickleball a ton. So he and I always have this discussion when we're hiking because he says I'm fit. And I keep trying to tell him I don't do anything except when I come out and walk. But he's also a little older than me. So I know I'm going to have to pay more attention to it. I just haven't so far.
Well, you've told me your kids are kind of nudging you about it.
Yeah, I know. Because I keep saying, well, so my theory on aging is that you want to hold some stuff in reserve. The inexorable march of time on your body. You want to have things that you can, start eating better and maybe start working out. And if you're already doing that stuff in your 30s and 40s, it's like, well, what are you going to do when you get older? So my theory was like, hold that stuff in reserve. So, at age 50, I started eating better and paying attention to that. And I just told her, son, I think at maybe age 70, I'll start, going to the gym and exercising. He says, Dad, you said 60 and then you said 65 and now you're saying 70. So yeah, I know I got to do it one of these days.
Well, it's a testament to your lifestyle. I mean, you're a lean, mean backpacking machine there. So
I'm lazy, as long as I can do what I want to do without training for it, then that's kind of the path of least resistance. But I did recently have a hard hike and I was pretty bush. So that was kind of like maybe not a wake up call, but a slight wake up alarm. Like, maybe don't wait till 70.
Okay. All right. Hopefully your kids will hear that, kind of hold you to it. So I want to plug one of your products. It's that shoulder strap pocket. I just want people to know it's kind of a game changer. A lot of people I hike with or backpack with, they have their phones because they want to, either they're navigating or they want to take. I love taking video. I really do, because sometimes those memories are indelible in some ways in my brain, but I also want to see it again. So I'll do that. And so I love that shoulder strap pocket from Gossamer Gear because you can put your phone right in it. Oh, it's sweet. I love it. I try to pitch people on it all the time. Anyway, there's my plug. But anything you want to just, I don't know if plug's the right word, anything that you just want to share, like one particular product that stands out, just for the heck of it, that, might interest people to just go to the website and just look at it and maybe they'll discover, some other things. Because clearly we've been talking about ultralight backpacking. So why not people start with Gossamer Gear, go to the website and check it out. So why don't you give them a little nugget on something where to start, and then, they can goof around it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people when they're starting, start with our Mariposa. It's one of our largest pack. We've just re-released that with a new frame that pivots so your hips can move differently than your shoulders and they're not constrained, but you still get the load transfer. And then the one tent, a lot of people like, it's got a bathtub floor. It's super roomy. Typically anything I design, since I'm 6'4", is generously cut. We've had some good response on the Whisper tent. It's not for everyone. It's floorless, but it's got mesh skirt around it. So you put a ground sheet in it, but keeps the bugs away. So it's a 10-ounce shelter, sets up with your trekking poles. And it's not for everyone, but the people are for go, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I was looking for. So yeah, I mean, we have packs in new colors that people are excited about. Check it out.
All right, cool. All right, last thing about the book. You're donating all your proceeds to the book. I'm just curious. Can you share what that is or where you're donating to or not? I don't know.
No, I'm donating to the Pacific Crest Trail Association, the longstanding relationship with them. I've hiked most of the Pacific Crest Trail, served on the board. I've lived in the West for most of my life now. And so it just seemed like a natural cause to, help them preserve, protect, and promote Pacific Crest Trail. There are plenty of great causes, but, my commitment, I don't, more money, I already give away a big chunk of our income now. So more money isn't going to change my lifestyle. So I'm lucky I don't need to make money from the book. So I'm happy to donate it to a cause that I have a long-standing relationship with.
So that's what really stands out in the book. I think people should, when they read it, they'll come across it and it'll stand out. And that is the percentage of your income that you do put aside. We don't need to get into that, but that's kind of like a teaser. I think that's very admirable, although you don't need any praise for it. It comes innate for you. And so, I don't know, just a little teaser, because you just mentioned about not needing the money. And in fact, you take a lot of your money and you do certain things with it. People can read the book and find out about that. One last thing about a book is that, are you tapped out on the book writing, or do you have something else in your heart or in your brain that, hey, maybe you missed in the book and you want to, I don't know.
Yeah, it's, I think the first idea is rattling around, which who knows if they'll ever get out, is a couple of study guides for the book. People have expressed some interest, like a leadership-based study guide, maybe a faith-based one. But it's also bounced around in my head a little to write a smaller book on handwritten notes, the power of handwritten notes, maybe some history on notes and materials and implements used and, famous examples, but also stories from my life. And I'm starting to get some stories from other people's lives on how a handwritten note has made such a huge impact, been a real inflection point in their life with a lifelong relationship or change in business or things like that. So who knows? Sometime in the future, we'll see.
Excellent. All right, my friend. I am so grateful that your friend reached out to me about chatting with you. Okay, very grateful. And in your book, your last lesson, it's number 15 or the 15th chapter. And it's called Say Yes. And I am so happy that I said yes. So thanks, Glenn. Appreciate it. Hope we stay in touch. Okay.
My pleasure. I'd like that.
All right. Take care, my friend. Bye. That concludes this episode of the Hike Strong podcast. I'm committed to keeping all of the episodes for free. All I ask is that you subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. My goal is to build a vast community of hikers with the confidence to crush any local or global trail. I hope you will join me in this endeavor. So until next time, train, hike, repeat, and as always, I'm here to support you every step of the way.